Hello, Jule Hall. It I always start this way. How do we know each other?
Hello, Emily. We met through a mutual friend that connected us. And I believe one time I was in California doing a conference, and you and I had dinner together and saw so many points of relation between us and our work that we have continued that, relationship even in spite of the pandemic virtually. So I definitely appreciate being in thought partnership with you, Emily.
Jule, it's really funny because sometimes you meet people, and I have a handful of these people in my life, and I remember the exact moment that I met them, and I remember thinking like, oh, they're just going to stay. Like this is just in the rotation.
Yes, from that first time, you can pick up on it, and you're right. That time in LA, it was one of those nights for me that I said, Emily is somebody that she feels like my sister.
And so I want to start with what drives you? What drives you to see change? What has always been with you that has driven you, and what continues to drive you now?
Yes, what has always been with me is this profound appreciation for the process of education. Education drives me. I set learning and being open to learning new things as one of my core values as a person, no matter which realm I'm operating in. And it drives me because not only when I was young, I would love going home to do my homework. I wanted to do my homework. But of course, I lived in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where my peer group weren't as interested in education as I was. So I had to always play down my nerdiness. But, I was incarcerated when I was 17. And, that first 2 weeks in prison was so profound for me. I went to a space where I really asked myself, why am I here? What brought me here? And while the answers didn't come to me then, one of the things that I realized was I started going down a path that I didn't agree with myself, with my own morality, when I stopped putting emphasis on education. That's what opened me up to many of the things I'm not proud about in my life, but everything that I have been proud about has been through education. I grew up in a family of learners. Whether it's my sister, I'm from a single parent home. Whether it was just me and my sister, we had books, we had letter blocks, but not just me and my sister, my cousins. I go to my cousin's house, they had letter blocks. So my family really orientated us towards education at an early age. So I realized I needed to get back into that. So in prison, I developed the identity around education and doing positive stuff. Now, it goes without saying that is not easy.
It's just not easy anywhere. That's one of my big questions for you.
But I really think it was very intuitive of me, and I filled a role in prison that was needed.
I was not a good student. I really struggled. I had a lot going on in my home life that I was trying to navigate, and it kept my mind so busy. And that may be why I wasn't a good student. It may also not be why I wasn't a good student. I was the youngest person in my class. So I was also trying to social and emotional learning, which is really where I was focused. And it's funny, that's what I ended up, doing essentially for a living with acting and with the nonprofit. How do you think you can get someone who is having a hard time clicking into learning at school, getting excited about doing their homework? What are there some other ways to inspire people?
But one of the things that I realized that may have had worked for me is one-on-one engagement. And I want to say this is what I did with prisoners while I was incarcerated, people who was incarcerated. I learned them. I didn't approach the education process as something that I had to give. I approach it as a process of engaging with another person and learning about them. I think
Wow.
we need that particular attention to the youth. You know, we come up with this elaborate system of education that brings children and many people into the class together. That's valid. It's one way of educating people. But some people, because of the reasons you just described, to have certain things going on in their lives that's traumatic or grabs their attention and prevents them from engaging the literature. I believe for me, I was one of those people. However, if I had a one-on-one engagement with someone who not only was opening themselves up to Jule, what's going on with you, but also said, well, Jule, I have this way of looking at algebra that is informative, or this way of looking at English as informative. I
It's
never
funny that
came across that.
well, it's funny that you say that, because the times that I did do well, I had someone sit down with me and say, let's talk about this process. And so I started working on a paper this week about just revamping our education system in a utopian way. And to start to begin to look at it, and this is not to disparage teachers, because man, I feel for them, anyone who is able to get out there and teach at all before the pandemic, now it is a miracle. Those are the miracle workers. But started thinking about just how narrowly we track education, and we teach, English and spelling and math and science, and it's very narrow. And if your high functioning skill set doesn't meet up with one of those, then you're destined to be leveled down just at the start in your personal identity. And what does that do for people who are already feeling leveled down, who are already operating under the false narrative of poverty and the false narrative of color and race and sexual orientation?
Let's just call it out. What we're talking about, particularly for Black and Brown communities, is the school to prison pipeline, where students who may receive a minor infraction for, speaking out or leaving the classroom to use the bathroom can receive a really serious consequence of police interaction, or many of the other ways in which this system grabs people and pull them in. But what I do believe, like, individual attention is important. We, as a country, we value the individual, but we will not cater, or what's the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for a way in which that one-on-one engagement brings out the best in a person. I'm not just a person in a class. Yes. I'm not just the average student on the street. I have unique capabilities, unique skill sets that need to be developed, and there needs to be some type of particular attention to my particular needs. I know that's a challenge with resources and stuff, but it's important if we want to lift up everyone. Another factor that I like to say that is so captured in the school to prison pipeline, as well as some of the more well-off neighborhoods, or neighborhoods that are not well-off, is the wraparound services that you need with school. Mm-hmm. Schooling is just one part of human development. We need other, like you're engaged with social and emotional intelligence. That's a part that I didn't get in school. My emotional intelligence were taught to me by my peer group. So, and I say that lightly, but it's really serious. I learned how to interact with people, when to put on a frown or when to be unresponsive, because of my peer group, people who were my same age and didn't know the world. So I really think we need those wraparound services. Also, I think it's just something in general that we could do. I think we need to stop putting young people in positions where they have to sit and listen.
Agreed.
But I just want to hear what they have to say. We need to put young people in some more challenging positions, because I think that will bring the best out of them. When we kind of like take the route, oh, you're too young for this, or you need to grow up a little bit before you get here, that is self-defeating as well. It has an impact
Absolutely.
on the individual mind as well. So I just want to lift up that individual attention, whether it's through a tutor or additional services and the wraparound services, whether it's related to mental health. Now in COVID, we're realizing that schools should be concerned about whether or not their students come to school hungry. You know, why did it take COVID for us to realize that? You know, so, you know, I just really think that we need to consider the whole person and how to develop the whole person, and stop generalizing and putting people all into one box and one size fit all with an educational process. We really need to engage with and develop the individual talents of people.
I could not agree with you more. I feel like this is our pathway to a kind and successful future. This is going to give us the tools to tackle our real problems, problems of the environment, problems of hunger, problems of purpose. And we can't do it if we're not really educating whole people and encouraging people to be whole.
Yeah. I realized that if I came to a person would ask me, hey, I need help writing this letter. But if I just jump right into the letter, it wouldn't be as informative for the other person. So what I would do is, you know, ask them, how are you? What's going on with you? In fact, I need to know this. If I'm gonna write this letter for you, I need to understand your way of thinking, your way of operating. And from having that engagement, it was just so phenomenal. You know, you see people perk up. You see people realize I am a whole person. And you are helping me to see that about myself.
Do you feel like your circumstances would have turned out differently if you had been in a smaller town, if you had been a white person? Do you feel like you got caught in the pipeline to prison?
Like, while I take responsibility for all my actions and I don't justify them, I do feel like there was the circumstance of Brownsville being a violent neighborhood.
Sure.
And the need to say, oh, we need to make a statement that this will not be tolerated. It's so interesting that that statement was made in many times over. However, Brownsville is still considered one of the most violent neighborhoods in New York City. So again, I think this is a place where we could reevaluate our approach and come up with some solutions. You know, one of the things I would love to see is, you know, I want to see more former gang members and people out of prison engage in the youth about violence. I think that we need to recognize the fact that a lot of the people from my generation engaged in violence when they were younger and grew and matured beyond it will be helpful to stop the youth from being engaged. I know when I engage with the youth, they give me, I'm so grateful for this, a platform where they listen to me. I think it is because they understand I'm going through, or I've been through what they've been through. But, you know, I am able to part that wisdom to them, like, listen, I've been there. You know, that doesn't work. That doesn't get you anywhere. You know, you could get more if you, this is where emotional intelligence come into play. If you're upset, you could get so much more done by finding a space to just sit down and calm down for 5 minutes and then approaching the situation.
This is a crazy question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a way for gangs to operate less violently?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Do you think that part of the violence comes from, it's oftentimes a collection of people who have been deeply traumatized looking for one another?
I would say yes, but I also see me, I think it's the proliferation of guns in these neighborhoods. I actually believe if a person is upset and doesn't have access to a gun, we'll see less gun violence. But why are there so many guns? I was amazed at 18, I remember growing up fighting with my hands. And then all of a sudden, within months, people were pulling out guns. And I was like, where are all these guns coming from in this neighborhood? you know? So we aren't
Was a
gonna,
gun a status symbol?
uh, there's literature that talks about this. I don't think that we should uh, use that the idea of status symbol. I think we live in a culture where violence, whether it's domestically or internationally, is actually normalized. Whether
Yeah.
the media, in the home, there's abuse. So I know for me, growing up, I actually thought violence was a way through which you get your point across. Until I started engaging back with education and said, no, intellect is how you really get your point across. But for me, I think the access to guns, while I understand it's a constitutional right for many, I do feel like we're living at a time where they're having more of a harm on our society than of a benefit. And I know that when people, particularly the age group I grew up in, what made the difference was if you had access to a gun.
You know, part of the reason why I decided to work in the social emotional language area is because when I did go into prison for the first time, I was amazed that those skills hadn't been shared, and we were discussing conflict. And I said, well, what are your options for conflict? And so many people were like,
Yeah.
options? It's just the one way. And I was like, no, there are actually options of how you can handle conflict in your life. And people were like, what?
And that's a good point, Emily, because you asked a question about can gangs be less violent? Yes, there's no doubt about it. We see this in many of the gangs in California now who have worked to eliminate violence. They still work with the challenge because they can't eliminate all the guns in their neighborhoods. But one thing I learned in prison is that more often than not, people in prison are asking themselves that same question I asked myself: why am I here?
Yeah.
Gang members, whomever. And in fact, like I said, that experience, that trauma that a person goes through before prison, and then now they're sitting in prison and they're forced to face it, has a constructive effect. I don't want to glorify prisons. I'm not here to glorify prisons. I want to be clear. However, I've met many men in prison who had that time to think and analyze themselves and could be very constructive in a conversation about violence and why violence isn't the way to go. In fact, many of the anti-violence programs, I don't know if you're aware of this, that are taught in our high schools began from prisoners engaging their own violence and coming up with a program in prison for anti-violence that has just really taken off and entered our high schools now. So I really, overall, I believe people who have been incarcerated and went through that work, because we go through that work in prison. We have the time to sit and say, I need to think about this. I need to correct this.
To hurt other people is a terrible thing to do. But almost everyone has done it. And how do we keep people from getting to a place where they hurt people so irreparably that they're killed and that their families never recover? How do we stop that? And I don't think it's by segregating people and punishing them. I wouldn't do that with my child. When she does something that causes her harm or someone else harm, I sit down and I say, are you aware?
Yeah.
What else could you have done? Let me provide some options of how you can handle the situation.
So notwithstanding the argument about the effectiveness and why prisons are creepy, I've met people there who are willing to do this work. However, we come home and we are faced with the stigmatization for our past actions. People aren't giving us a chance. I've been blessed because people have given me a chance to show, wow, Jule, you really are about the work that you're doing. And I would say there are many others, but our society does not provide the space for people to say, hey, I am different. Let me show you.
How do you think, because there are many people in the police who work really hard to keep peace and to show up when people call and need help. What do you think is the way for the police force to get back on track and to weed out the violent offenders in that job?
Listen, I think that, and again, I'm not against the police. I have great relationships with officers and correctional officers at that. However, again, it's our society that trains people that authority is violence. Many officers are just doing what they're taught. You know, I would say that they should have the level of humanity to say, wait, this isn't right. Or when there's people on the sideline saying, hey, you're hurting that guy, get off him, to have the sensibility to say, wait, you're right. I need that. That's humanity there. There's no justification for those types of actions. However, and this is what prison has taught me about the notion of security. Security is brought about through violence. I care, not because I recognize a universal humanity, but because I have this gun and I have the ability to cause violence, you should submit to my security. And I think we need to engage that to understand why society is the way it is now, so that we can have some more constructive engagements with each other. But I do believe that we need to empower communities to handle their own problems.
Absolutely.
You know, let's give people, like what the violence interrupters are doing in places like Chicago and all over the nation, the ability to say, oh, something happened, let me find out why. Simple solutions to the problems that we are facing as a society today. However, I think there are some common sense responses that we could rely upon as we work on finding out what is the solution.
Moving forward, you said something to me that I have passed on to so many, and it was so wonderful. You said you have the right to be selfish about the change you want to see. I want to ask you, so did you see yourself ending up in a space of nonprofit? If you had never gone to prison, if you had never had that life interruption, do you think you would have ended up in nonprofit eventually? Or would you have gone somewhere else entirely, and where would that have been?
Yeah, no, I didn't see myself in nonprofit. Actually, now, however, I realize it's a natural development from my trajectory in life, because impacted experience is so needed in the non-for-profit realm. But I want to say, you know, I want to bring out a couple of factors of my youth. One is I came up in a generation of particularly Black men who were told that we wouldn't live past 25. And that statistic—
Wait, let me just stop you. Do you think that was everywhere? Was it just in like a big city neighborhood that was violent? Was that just an across the board belief?
Well, I can't speak to that. I can say it was a commonly held one, because I've had the fortune of talking to rappers, people from different areas that say the same thing, that there was a consciousness that I need to live my life as much as I can now, because I'm not going to live past 25. So I get worried about these statistics and how they're put out, because they may have the opposite effect. So for me, it was, I don't think it was widespread. I never try to make generalizations as you know, that's not me, but overall, I do know this idea had traction amongst the people I've been incarcerated with. And since I've been released, I've talked with some guys from my generation who had the same idea. And
did women have the same feeling?
That's a great question. I hadn't talked to women about it, but the statistic particularly was for young Black men. It said young Black men will not, statistics show that young Black men were 3 times as likely, I forgot the specific statistic, to die before the age of 25. So I actually, and like I said, I spoke with people about this. I actually lived my life as if I was about to die.
Wow.
At the age of 17.
And you know what's funny? Like, I had the exact opposite feeling. I lived my youth waiting for my life to start. I was like, when I'm 17, I will go here and my life will start. I just was biding my time.
I'll turn 45 this year. I'm so happy that I am, and I never thought I'd be in a position that I am now. However, again, once I shift my focus back to education, I realized that there was some potential there. I knew as long as I focused on education, educating others, recognize that I'm a student, I'm a lifelong student, is going to keep me in a position not only to develop myself, but to help others.
You can fix any problem with this pile of money. What would you choose?
Ooh. For me,
So many to choose from.
One, I want to say if a pile of money fell to me out the sky, I'd be scared. I think it has no value. I got my check, the stimulus check from the government, and I was like, what am I going to end up paying back for this money? To me, I have this idea, there's nothing free in the world. So be wary if something just dropped to you out of the sky. But the issue I'm most concerned about is women incarceration. Women are the fastest in growing incarcerated population in the nation today. Also, if I could specify it, college programming for women in prison. Because for me, women that are at the critical points of any culture, and if we want to impact a culture, we need to be supportive and engage with women who will teach our children. So I really feel like if we really want to resolve some of these issues, or to go back to your question, if money fell out of the sky into my hands, I will put it in programs or support for women, their education, their stability, their safety.
One thing I want to ask you about is brand. And this is one thing that we talk about in class, in our social emotional language class, and I talk about a lot with Pippa. And I sort of try and show her how I've made my choices through my own personal brand. And I follow two things. I never cheapen my brand, and I never stray from my brand. What do you think is your brand?
My brand is education.
Give me a collection of traits that are Jule that you will never stray from.
Integrity. I'm so big on integrity. Collaboration. I'm always looking for ways to work with people. I look for commonalities instead of differences. And education. I really believe that education is transformative in any setting. I think that education sits at a position in our society that makes society better. You know, if we had a decent, it doesn't even have to be fabulous, but if we had a decent education apparatus that people in society went through, we would see so much in our society. But what we actually are witnessing, that people are going into the educational system and either being diverted to prison, drugs, or a low-end job that they're not even happy with. You know, so I really feel like that's my brand, you know, and again, I built this while I was in prison, and now I'm home and I'm continuing. People know me as a person that if you have a topic, an idea that you want to go back and forth with, we could talk. People know me, if I'm gonna talk to kids, I'm gonna talk to them about books and what they're reading. Everything revolves around education for me. So for me, I recognize my personal brand as being the transformative power of education and everything that's affiliated with that. I want to be clear, I affiliate critical thinking, civic engagement, open-mindedness, being willing to listen, as well as responsibility, because I don't think education is something that people should be passive about. I think we need to be actively engaged with our education. You know, you should have a role in your own education. It shouldn't be a one-way street where the teacher is just telling you what you need to know.
But if you had to support any charity, what charity would you choose?
There's an organization led by Susan Burton called A New Way of Life. I love Susan as a good friend. She is so engaged with these issues on so many different platforms, particularly of women who are released and need to be provided with levels of engagement that would assist their reintegration into society. Also, BY100, I think it's BYP 100, Black Youth 100. It's a youth organization that I feel is just so centered on the youth. And I feel like we are really doing ourselves a disservice with our youth. The youth are rebelling against us. They aren't in a position to succeed in the society that we are leaving for them. So, you know, I would say BY100, but any youth organization that's working with engaging with youth would be so important right now. That's where we need to put our attention.
Jule, you are such a beautiful and inspiring human. I feel so lucky that you are in my life and I've gotten to know you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with everyone. Thank you for your time today. And be well, be happy, be you.
Thank you, Emily. The feeling is definitely mutual. Thank you so much.